The first time I saw Lorenzo Rossi, I thought he was a storm cloud that had taken human form. He moved through the charity gala not like a guest, but like a king surveying a kingdom he found mildly disappointing. The air itself seemed to part for him, the chatter of the rich and beautiful dimming to a respectful hush in his wake. I was just the hired help, Sophia, the event planner, desperately trying to make sure the ice sculptures didn't melt onto the $1,000,000 Persian rugs. Our worlds were never meant to touch. But then a waiter, flustered by Lorenzo's passing, stumbled. A tray of champagne flutes tipped. A crystal waterfall aimed directly at my white silk blouse. I braced for the cold, expensive impact. It never came. A hand, large and impossibly fast, shot out and caught the tray, stabilizing it with an effortless grace that defied physics. Not a single drop was spilled. My heart hammered against my ribs. That hand belonged to Lorenzo Rossi. He was close enough that I could smell the clean, sharp scent of his cologne. Cedar and something darker, like a forest at midnight. His eyes, a shade of gray I'd only ever seen in winter skies, found mine. They weren't cold, though. They were intensely, unnervingly focused. "A crisis averted," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated right through me. He didn't smile. He handed the tray back to the stammering waiter, his gaze never leaving my face. "Thank you," I managed, my voice a shaky whisper. He gave a single slow nod. "Sophia." My name on his lips shouldn't have felt so intimate. He knew my name. Of course he did. He was Lorenzo Rossi. He probably knew the name of every person in this room and their deepest, darkest secrets. He turned and walked away, the spell broken. The party's noise swelled back to its normal roar, but I stood frozen, my skin still tingling from the intensity of his attention. That should have been the end of it. A strange, fleeting moment in a life that was otherwise meticulously normal, but it wasn't. The next day, a single perfect white rose was delivered to my office. No note, just the rose. I told myself it was a coincidence, a thank you from the gala's host. But another came the day after, and the day after that. A week later, my small, cluttered desk was a garden of silent, perfumed white roses. My assistant raised her eyebrows. "You have a secret admirer, Soph." A cold dread was pooling in my stomach. This didn't feel like admiration. It felt like a claim. The emails started next. My business email is the one on my company's website. The first one was simple. "I hope you enjoyed the Monet exhibition last night. The water lilies reminded me of you, serene on the surface, but with hidden depths. I had gone to that exhibition alone." How did he know? The following emails were more personal. He commented on the book I was reading on the train. I always picked up the coffee order on my way to work, the song I'd been humming while stuck in traffic. He was everywhere. He was in the details of my life. A ghost looking over my shoulder. I was being watched, stalked. I changed my routines. I took different routes. I stopped going to my usual places. The roses kept coming. The emails became more intense, more possessive. "I don't like seeing you talk to him, Sophia." This after a brief friendly chat with my mailman. Fear became my constant companion. It was a low-grade fever, a hum of anxiety that never left me. I went to the police. They were polite, dismissive. "Without an explicit threat, there's little we can do, Ms. Reed. It sounds like he's just attentive." The word was a joke. This was a hunt. I was considering quitting my job, leaving the city, disappearing. And then, the final straw. My purse slipped from my shoulder as I was rushing to a client meeting. The contents scattered across the pavement. Lipstick, keys, wallet, a tampon, and a small, black metallic disc about the size of a coin. It looked innocuous, like a battery or a component from some electronic toy. But I knew. With a cold, sickening certainty that turned my blood to ice, I knew. I picked it up. It was sleek, weighty. I didn't know what a tracking device looked like, but I was holding one in my hand. This was how he knew. This was how he was always there, in the details. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man who had put a digital leash on me. The fear curdled into a hot, blinding rage. This wasn't admiration. This was a violation. This was a crime. I didn't think. I acted on pure, furious instinct. I drove straight to the one place I knew I would find him. His office tower, a monolith of steel and glass that pierced the city's skyline, was a monument to his power. I didn't have an appointment. I didn't care. I marched through the revolving doors, my heart pounding a war drum in my chest. The lobby was vast, silent, and intimidating. A sleek, polished reception desk stood between me and the bank of elevators. A security guard stepped forward, but I was already at the desk, slamming the small black device down on the cool marble surface. The sound echoed in the quiet space. "I need to see Lorenzo Rossi. Now." The receptionist, a perfectly composed woman with an icy smile, didn't even blink. "Do you have an appointment, ma'am? Tell him Sophia is here." My voice trembled, but not with fear. With fury. "And tell him I found his gift." Her smile didn't falter, but she picked up the phone, her eyes never leaving mine. She spoke quietly into the receiver. A moment later, she nodded. "Mr. Rossi will see you. Penthouse elevator. He's expecting you." The ride-up was a silent, swift ascent. The doors opened directly into his domain. His office was all sharp angles and breathtaking views, a room designed for a man who owned everything he saw. And there he was, standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, silhouetted against the sprawling city. He turned as I entered. He looked exactly as he had at the gala. Impeccable, powerful, completely in control. His eyes went to the tracking device I was still clutching in my white-knuckled hand. I strode forward, my entire body shaking with adrenaline. I threw the device onto his desk. It skittered across the polished wood and came to a stop in front of him. "What is this?" My voice was raw. He didn't even look at it. His winter gray eyes held mine, and in their depths, I saw not an ounce of shame or apology. I saw a terrifying possessive satisfaction. He took a slow step toward me, then another, until he was close enough to touch. The scent of him, that same cedar and night, wrapped around me. He was so much larger up close, his presence overwhelming all my senses. He reached out, not for the device, but for my hand. His fingers were warm as they closed around mine, prying the tracker from my grip. He held it up between us, his gaze locked on mine. "Good," he said, his voice low and intimate, a secret meant only for me. "Now you know I'll always find you." The words didn't feel threatening. They felt like a law of nature, a simple, terrifying statement of fact. "Now you know I'll always find you." My breath hitched, caught in my throat like a trapped bird. The rage that had carried me here evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hollow fear. I tried to pull my hand back, but his grip was firm, not painful, but absolute, unbreakable. "You're insane," I whispered, the words sounding feeble and small in the vast, silent office. "No," he replied, his thumb stroking the back of my hand, a gesture so intimate it made my skin crawl, and to my horror, a treacherous part of me shivered at the contact. "I am thorough. I am careful. The world is a dangerous place, Sophia, especially for someone like you." "Someone like me?" I managed to choke out. "What does that even mean?" "Beautiful," he said, the word dropping like a stone into the quiet between us. "Unaware. A flicker of light in a very dark room. You attract attention. Not all of it is benign." He finally released my hand. I snatched it back, cradling it against my chest as if it were injured. My skin still tingled from his touch. "You had no right," I said, finding a sliver of my earlier anger. "This is stalking. This is a crime." "It is protection," he corrected, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned and walked back to his desk, picking up the tracker. He held it as if it were a precious artifact. "Do you know how many enemies a man in my position has, Sophia? How many people would see harming someone connected to me as the ultimate victory?" "I'm not connected to you." The protest was desperate, aren't you? He tilted his head, studying me with that unnerving focus. "The moment I caught that tray, the moment I saw the look in your eyes, you became connected. Perception is everything in my world, and my enemies perceived my interest in you. That made you a target the second you walked out of that gala." A cold dread began to seep into my bones, more frigid than the initial fear. Was it possible? Was this monstrous violation his twisted way of keeping me safe? "So you decided to track my every move? To collect me?" I gestured wildly at the room, at the view that showcased his dominion over the city. "To put me in a gilded cage? I decided to ensure you were still breathing every morning," he said, his voice dropping, losing its polished edge and revealing something raw beneath. "The roses were a reminder that you were seen. The emails were a reminder that you were known. This," he held up the tracker again, was my guarantee that if someone tried to take you, I would know, and I would come for you. The logic was circular, insane, and yet delivered with such conviction that it created a crack in my reality. Was I the unreasonable one? Was my desire for privacy and freedom a naive luxury I could no longer afford simply because he had glanced at me? "I want you to stop," I said, forcing my voice to be steady. "I want the roses to stop, the emails to stop. I want you to erase me from your mind. I am not yours to protect." A faint, almost sad smile touched his lips. "It is too late for that." The finality in his voice was a door slamming shut. I felt a wave of dizziness. My life, the one I had built with my own 2 hands, was gone. It had been dismantled in a few short weeks by a man who believed his want was a command. "What happens now?" I asked, the fight draining out of me, replaced by a numb exhaustion. "You can't expect me to just accept this. I expect you to be sensible," he said. He came around the desk, stopping a few feet away. "You have 2 choices. You can continue to fight me, to try and run. You will fail, and the process will be stressful for you. Or you can accept the reality of the situation. And what reality is that? That you are under my protection now, that your safety is my concern, and that the best way to ensure that safety is for you to remain close." "Close," I repeated, the word tasting like ash. "You mean a prisoner." "I mean a guest," he corrected, his tone mild but his eyes sharp. "You will have everything you need. You can continue your work remotely. Your clients will be notified of a necessary relocation due to a security issue. It is not a lie. The efficiency of it was breathtaking. He had planned for this. He had planned for my defiance and had a cage already prepared, furnished with plausible excuses and a continued professional existence. I would disappear, and the world would think I had chosen to. My family, my friends, will be told the same story. A generous, anonymous client has hired you for an extended confidential project overseas. They will worry, but they will not panic. And they will be safe, because there will be no reason for anyone to connect them to you or to me. He had thought of everything. He had isolated me perfectly. "This is a nightmare," I breathed, wrapping my arms around myself. "It is the only way to keep you out of a coffin," he replied, his voice brutally matter-of-fact. "The man who was following you last Tuesday, the one in the blue sedan. He was not one of mine. The air left my lungs last Tuesday. I had gone to the grocery store. I remembered a blue sedan. I had thought I was being paranoid. You see?" he said softly, seeing the recognition on my face. "This is not a game, Sophia. This is not my ego. This is survival. Your survival." He walked to the elevator and pressed a button. The doors slid open silently. A woman stood there, severe, in a sharp black suit, her hair in a tight silver bun. She looked like she could wrestle a bear and file its taxes afterward. "This is Ms. Petrova," Lorenzo said. "She will take you to your new accommodations and see that you have everything you require." I didn't move. I was rooted to the spot, my mind screaming in protest, but my body understanding the futility of it all. Running was pointless. Fighting was pointless. He had all the power, all the resources, and a twisted, unshakable conviction that he was right. "Sophia," he said, "my name a command. It is time to go." Ms. Petrova extended a hand, not to touch me, but to guide me into the elevator. It was a gesture of cold courtesy. I looked back at Lorenzo. He stood by his desk, the tracking device still in his hand, his expression one of grim satisfaction. He had won. I was his. With legs that felt like they were made of lead, I stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, sealing me in with the silent Ms. Petrova. I was descending from his world, but I wasn't escaping it. I was being delivered to my new home within it. A gilded cage just as I'd feared. And the most terrifying part was the small, shameful flicker of relief amidst the fear. The relief that someone, even someone like him, was fighting to keep me alive. The new accommodations weren't an apartment. They were a fortress disguised as a luxury penthouse. A different building, but the same breathtaking, isolating view of the city. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a world I could no longer touch. The air was still and silent, smelling of new leather and money. Ms. Petrova moved through the space with a cold efficiency, showing me the alarm system, the stocked kitchen, and the walk-in closet already filled with clothes in my size. The intimacy of that detail made me feel sick. "Your personal effects from your apartment will be brought here later today," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Your phone and laptop have been replaced with secure models. Your old devices are being analyzed for any prior compromises." "You took my things?" I asked, a fresh wave of violation washing over me. "It was necessary for the integrity of the operation," she replied, as if I were a mission objective. "Mr. Rossi's head of security, Kale, will be stationed outside your door. Do not attempt to leave." She left, and the lock on the front door engaged with a heavy metallic thud. I was alone. I stood in the center of the vast living room, hugging myself. It was the most beautiful place I had ever been, and it felt like a tomb. I thought of my cozy, cluttered apartment, with its squeaky floorboards, and the neighbor's cat that sometimes wandered onto my fire escape. I would have given anything for that messy, ordinary life back. The first few days were the worst. The silence was deafening. Kale, a mountain of a man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, brought me meals. He never spoke. He just placed the tray inside the door and left. I tried to work, emailing clients from the new, sterile laptop, explaining my sudden relocation for a confidential project. The lies tasted bitter, but the work was an anchor, a thread connecting me to the person I used to be. Lorenzo didn't visit, but his presence was constant. Notes arrived with my meals, written in a sharp, elegant script. "I trust you are settling in. The view is best at sunset." Or, "I saw the translation you did for the Geneva account. Impeccable work." He was still watching. He was doing it from a distance now. On the fourth day, a storm rolled in over the city. Dark clouds bruised the sky and rain lashed against the windows, blurring the world into a watercolor of gray and light. The power flickered once, then went out. The silent penthouse was plunged into an even deeper quiet, broken only by the wind's howl. A primal fear, separate from my fear of Lorenzo, gripped me. I was trapped in a glass box in the sky, in the dark. I fumbled for one of the emergency flashlights Ms. Petrova had shown me. Its beam was a weak, lonely spear in the overwhelming darkness. I heard the lock on the front door disengage. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. Kale! Or had someone else gotten in? The door opened. It was Lorenzo. He stood silhouetted in the doorway, his coat dark with rain, his hair damp. He held a large, old-fashioned hurricane lamp, its warm, golden flame casting dancing shadows across his sharp features. He looked like he'd walked out of the storm itself. "The building's backup generator will engage shortly," he said, his voice calm in the chaotic dark. I was nearby. I didn't believe him. He had come because he knew. He knew the storm would frighten me, that the darkness in this sterile cage would feel like a punishment. He had come to be the light. He stepped inside, placing the lamp on the coffee table. The warm glow pushed back the oppressive dark, creating a small island of light in the vast room. He shrugged off his wet coat and draped it over a chair. "Are you all right?" he asked. It was the first time he'd asked me a question that felt like it sought an honest answer. "No," I whispered, my voice trembling. "I'm not all right. I'm a prisoner." He didn't deny it. He looked at me, his gray eyes reflecting the flickering lamplight. "Would you prefer to be a corpse?" The bluntness of the question stole my breath. "There has to be another way." "This is the only way that guarantees you see tomorrow." He took a step closer. The storm raged behind him, a dramatic backdrop to his unsettling stillness. "Your friend, Chloe. She had a flat tire on the interstate 2 days ago. A cold knot tightened in my stomach." "How do you know that?" "Because the car that forced her off the road was not there by accident. They were sending a message, a warning. They knew she was your closest friend." He held my gaze, his expression grim. "My men intervened. She is shaken but unharmed. She believes it was a road rage incident. She has no idea her life was in danger because of her connection to you." Tears welled in my eyes, hot and sharp. Chloe. Sweet, funny Chloe, who loved bad reality TV and hated her job. She'd almost been hurt because of me, because of him. The last remnants of my defiance crumbled. He was right. This wasn't a game. My everyday life was already gone. It had been the moment he noticed me. All that was left was the aftermath. "I'm sorry," I choked out. though I wasn't sure who I was apologizing to. Chloe, or myself for my own naivete. "You have nothing to be sorry for," he said, his voice softer now. He closed the distance between us. He didn't touch me, but I could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the rain on his skin. "The world is not a kind place, Sophia. I am not a kind man, but I keep what is mine safe." The word mine should have felt like a brand. Instead, in the terrifying storm-lashed darkness, with the proof that the danger was real, and not just his paranoia, it felt like a shield. A terrible, unwanted, but unbreakable shield. The lights flickered back on, the penthouse flooding with a harsh electric glow. The moment was broken. The storm outside was already beginning to recede. Lorenzo picked up his lamp. His job was done. He had reinforced the walls of my cage, and he had made me grateful for them. He left as quietly as he had arrived, the lock engaging once more behind him. I stood alone in the bright, silent room, the city lights twinkling below as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. I was no longer just his prisoner. I was starting to understand his language, the language of fear and possession, and a protection that felt indistinguishable from a curse. And the most frightening part was that I was starting to learn how to speak it. The storm had washed the city clean, but it left a new kind of tension inside the penthouse. The knowledge that Chloe had been targeted was a cold, hard stone in my gut. My defiance was gone, replaced by a numb, chilling acceptance. Lorenzo's world wasn't an abstraction anymore. It was a real, violent place with real consequences, and I was now living in its shadow. The next morning, the lock on the door disengaged at exactly 8 a.m. It wasn't Cale with a breakfast tray. It was Lorenzo. He stood in the doorway, dressed not in a suit, but in dark, casual trousers and a simple black sweater. It made him seem more approachable, which was somehow more dangerous. "Get dressed," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Something comfortable. We're going out." Out? The word felt foreign. The world outside these windows had become a distant, dangerous memory. "You've been confined long enough. It's counterproductive. You need air." He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over me. "And we need to talk somewhere that isn't monitored." The idea of leaving the penthouse sent a jolt of both fear and wild hope through me. Was this a test? An opportunity? My heart hammered against my ribs. I just nodded and retreated to the bedroom, pulling on the jeans and soft sweater from the closet that still didn't feel like mine. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a low-slung, costly car I didn't know the name of. Lorenzo drove with a focused, effortless precision. Cale followed in a black SUV a discreet distance behind. We didn't speak. The city streamed past the windows, a vibrant, living thing I had been removed from. I saw people laughing on a street corner, a woman chasing a runaway dog, and a man buying a newspaper. Normal life. It felt like watching a movie about a world I could no longer visit. He drove out of the city, the buildings giving way to trees showing the first hints of autumn color. After about 40 minutes, he turned down a narrow, winding road that led to a state park. It was a weekday, and the place was nearly empty. He parked and we got out. The air was cool and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the wind in the trees and the distant cry of a hawk. He started walking down a path that led into the woods, and I had no choice but to follow. Cale remained with the cars, a silent sentinel at the edge of the wilderness. We walked in silence for a few minutes, the thick canopy of trees swallowing us whole. It was the first time in weeks I couldn't see a single artificial structure. I felt a tightness in my chest that I hadn't even known was there begin to ease. "Who are they?" I finally asked, my voice small in the vast quiet of the forest. "The people who forced Chloe off the road." "A rival," he said, his voice matter of fact. "Alessandro Marino. He sees my interest in you as a vulnerability. He believes by threatening you, he can force me into a mistake, or at least demonstrate that my protection is not absolute." His interest in me. He said it so casually, as if it were a known documented fact like the weather. "Why?" I asked, the question bursting from me. "Why me? You saw me once at a party. That's it. All of this. Because you caught a tray?" He stopped walking and turned to face me. The dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves played across his face, softening its harsh lines. For the first time, he looked uncertain, as if searching for the right words in a language he wasn't fluent in. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who want something from me," he began, his voice low. "Power, money, fear, favor. Every smile is calculated. Every word has an agenda. I look at people and I see the strings attached to them. The debts, the ambitions." He took a step closer, his gray eyes holding mine. "And then I saw you. You were trying to become one with the wallpaper. You had no agenda. You were just there, real. When that tray fell, you didn't look at me with greed or fear. You looked at me with surprise, and then gratitude. It was a transaction with no currency I recognized. It was genuine." He reached out, and this time, his fingers gently brushed a strand of hair from my cheek. The touch was so different from the possessive grip in his office. It was hesitant, almost reverent. "I am a man who owns everything he sees," he whispered. "But I have never owned a single genuine moment. Until that one, and I knew I would set the world on fire to keep it." His confession hung in the pine-scented air, more terrifying than any threat. This wasn't just about possession or protection. It was about obsession. He wasn't keeping me safe because I was a pawn. He was keeping me safe because I was a relic, a rare artifact of something he believed he couldn't find anywhere else. My normality was the prize. "I'm not a moment, Lorenzo," I said, my voice shaking. "I'm a person, with a life, with dreams that don't involve being hidden away in a penthouse." "Tell me one," he said, his hand dropping back to his side. "One dream. Right now." The request threw me. I thought of my quiet dream of saving enough to open my own small event planning firm, of maybe traveling to see the northern lights one day. Simple, ordinary dreams that now felt like childish fantasies. "I wanted to see the cherry blossoms in Japan," I heard myself say. It was a silly, fleeting wish I'd had since college. He didn't laugh. He just nodded, as if filing away vital intelligence. "Then we will go. That's not the point," I cried, frustration bubbling over. "The point is, I wanted to go on my terms. With a friend, or alone, not as part of your collection." "Then what is the point, Sophia?" he asked, his voice intense. "If your life is in danger the moment you step out from my protection, what are your terms worth? A dream from a grave is not a dream at all." He had an answer for everything. His logic was a maze with no exit. I turned away from him, wrapping my arms around myself, staring into the deep, unknowable woods. I felt his presence behind me, a solid, immovable force. "I can't live like this," I whispered, the truth of it cracking my voice. "You can," he said, his voice close to my ear. "You are stronger than you think. You have already adapted. You need to stop fighting the current and learn to swim with it." He was wrong. I wasn't swimming. I was drowning. But the terrible, shameful truth was that part of me was starting not to mind the water. The constant, grinding fear of bills, of loneliness, of a future that was just more of the same. That was gone, replaced by a different, more acute fear, but also by a strange, intoxicating security. He was a monster, but he was my monster. He didn't try to touch me again. We walked back to the car in silence. The ride back to the penthouse felt different. The cage was still a cage, but he had just shown me a glimpse of the man who held the key, a man who saw me not as a thing, but as a light in his darkness. And I was terrified to realize that part of me, the lonely, tired part, wanted to be that for someone, even if that someone was him. The woods had changed something. A silent, unspoken truce had settled between us. The frantic, caged animal panic inside me had dulled to a watchful calm. Lorenzo began to visit the penthouse not as a warden, but as a guest. It was the strangest courtship imaginable, conducted entirely within the walls of my prison. He would arrive in the evenings, often with food from restaurants I'd only ever read about. We would eat at the dining table, and he would ask me about my day. He was genuinely interested in my translation work, probing the nuances of language with a sharp, analytical mind that mirrored my own. He wasn't just making conversation. He was engaging me and challenging me. One night he brought a bottle of wine and a stack of old maps. He spread them out on the floor, their corners held down by books, and told me stories of the neighborhoods his father and grandfather had controlled, pointing out territories that had been won and lost in blood. It was a history lesson from the devil himself, and I was a captivated student. Another time, he found me looking at a language learning app, trying to brush up on my rusty Japanese. "For your cherry blossoms?" he'd asked. I'd just nodded, surprised he remembered. The next day, a private tutor arrived at the penthouse for my first lesson. I was too stunned to refuse. The cage was being furnished with everything I could ever want, and the bars were starting to feel less like cold steel and more like the frame of a lovely, costly painting I was at the center of. I was adapting, just as he'd said I would. The fear was still there, but another had joined it, a more dangerous emotion, a flickering, impossible fascination. I found myself listening for the sound of the elevator, my pulse quickening when I heard his key in the lock. I was starting to see the man behind the myth, the lonely boy who'd inherited a kingdom of violence, the intellectual who devoured books on history and philosophy, the man who looked at me as if I held a secret he'd been searching for his entire life. It was after one of these evenings, a week after our trip to the woods, that the carefully constructed world shuddered. We were in the library, and I was trying to explain the subtle, untranslatable melancholy in a particular Portuguese word. He was leaning against the bookshelves, watching me, a faint smile on his lips. The air between us was warm, charged with an intimacy that had grown as naturally and inevitably as a vine. The intercom from the front door buzzed, a harsh, intrusive sound. Lorenzo's smile vanished, his posture snapping back to that of a general. He walked over and pressed the button. "Yes." Kyle's voice, tight and urgent, came through the speaker. "Boss, we have a situation. A car just tried to force our vehicle off the road on the return route. It was a coordinated move. They knew we were coming." Lorenzo's face went perfectly still. "Casualties?" "No, we lost them in the warehouse district. But they were professionals. It was an extraction attempt, not a hit." My blood ran cold. Extraction. They weren't trying to kill him. They were trying to take him. To capture Lorenzo Rossi. The sheer audacity was staggering. Lorenzo's eyes met mine across the room. The warmth was gone, replaced by a glacial coldness. Marino was getting impatient. And reckless. He spoke into the intercom again. "Lock it down. No one in or out. I'm initiating Protocol Aegis." "Understood." He ended the communication and pulled out his phone, typing a rapid series of commands. Throughout the penthouse, I heard a series of soft, heavy thuds as additional bolts slid into place on the doors and windows. The hum of the ventilation system changed pitch. "We were in a vault. What's Protocol Aegis?" I asked, my voice small. "It means the threat level has been elevated," he said, his voice all business. "It means they are making their move. And it means they know my patterns. They knew I would be here tonight." He looked at me, and his gaze was a physical weight. "They know about this place. They know about you." The room, which had started to feel like a home, instantly reverted to a trap. The walls felt like they were closing in. "What do? We wait. My men are tracking the vehicle. We will have answers by morning." He walked toward me, stopping just in front of me. The casualness of the man from moments before was gone, replaced by the formidable Dawn. "This changes nothing about your safety. This penthouse can withstand a small army. It's not my safety I'm worried about." The words burst out of me, sharp and accurate. I was worried about him. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. Somewhere in the chaos, in the shared meals and the late-night conversations, my fear of him had twisted into a fear for him. His intense gaze softened, just for a fraction of a second. He reached out and cupped my cheek, his thumb stroking my skin. "Do not worry for me, Sophia. Men have been trying to kill me since I was a boy. They have all failed. There's a first time for everything," I whispered, my heart aching with a strange protective ferocity. A slow, genuine smile touched his lips, a rare and breathtaking sight. "Then it will not be today." He leaned in and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to my forehead. It was a gesture of comfort, of possession, and of promise. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, we go on the offensive." He left me then, retreating to the study to make a series of phone calls, his voice a low, commanding rumble through the walls. I stood alone in the library, my skin still tingling from his touch, my mind reeling from the night's events. The attack had shattered the illusion of normalcy he'd so carefully built. The danger was real, and it was at the door. But as I stood there, listening to the sound of his voice, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was joined by something else, a fierce, defiant resolve. They had tried to take him, and the fire that ignited in my chest at that thought was not the fear of a prisoner for her jailer. It was the fury of a woman for her man. The line I had sworn I would never cross had been erased without me even noticing. I was no longer just his captive. I was his ally. And God help anyone who tries to take him from me. The night passed in a tense, watchful silence. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the low, muffled sounds of Lorenzo's voice from the study. Each time I heard him speak, a little of the cold fear inside me thawed. He was alive. He was in control. He was here. Dawn broke, painting the sky in streaks of pale pink and gold. The city below began to stir, oblivious to the war being waged in its glittering towers. The lock on the study door clicked open, and Lorenzo emerged. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his gaze was clear and sharp, burning with a cold fire. He came to the sofa and sat beside me, the cushion dipping with his weight. He didn't speak for a moment, just looked out at the waking city. "They were Marino's men," he said finally, his voice rough with lack of sleep. "We identified 2 of them from traffic cameras. Low-level soldiers, but well-equipped. The car was stolen, of course. What happens now?" I asked, my voice hushed. "Now," he said, turning to look at me. "We remind Alessandro Marino why he has spent the last 10 years in my shadow and not the other way around." There was no boast in his tone, only a simple, chilling statement of fact. He has made a critical error. He has shown his hand, and he has targeted what is mine. The word mine no longer felt like a brand. It felt like a shield, a declaration of unity. I was under his protection. But he was also, in some twisted, profound way, under mine. We were bound together in this now. What can I do? The question surprised me as much as it seemed to surprise him. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "You can stay safe. That is your only role." "No," I said, a new strength firming my voice. I was tired of being a passive prize to be fought over. "That's not enough. You said I see things others don't. Use that. Let me help." He studied me for a long moment, his gray eyes searching my face. He saw the determination there, the refusal to be sidelined. A slow nod. "Very well, but you follow my lead." "Exactly. Is that understood?" "Understood." An hour later, Franco arrived, his expression grimmer than usual. He carried a tablet and didn't even blink at my presence. I was now part of the furniture, an accepted part of the operational landscape. "We've traced the funding for the operation," Franco said, pulling up complex financial charts on the tablet. "It's being filtered through a shell corporation. Aurora Holdings. The paperwork is flawless. It's the kind of work Silas Hawk would broker." Lorenzo's jaw tightened. Hawk, of course. Marino wouldn't have the sophistication for this on his own. He took the tablet and scrolled through the data. "It's a dead end. The corporation will lead nowhere." "Let me see," I said. Both men looked at me. Lorenzo hesitated for only a second before handing me the tablet. "The transaction descriptions. The language. Look for the pattern." I fell into the work, my translator's brain latching onto the words, not the numbers. "For consultancy services, for strategic logistical support." The language was, as Lorenzo had said, flawless. But as I scanned page after page of dry financial records, something else caught my eye. Not in the descriptions, but in the points of contact. The email addresses for the corporate officers. "This one," I said, pointing to a string of letters and numbers. Franco Leo Aurora Holdings.LC. Franco leaned in. "What about it?" "The name. Franco. It's not a common first name for an anonymous shell corporation. It's an inside joke, or an arrogant signature." I looked at Lorenzo. "Does the name Leo mean anything to you? In Marino's organization?" Lorenzo's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. He looked at Franco. "Leonardo, Marino's nephew. The one he's been grooming. Arrogant. Thinks he's a mastermind." "He used his own name," I said. a thrill of discovery coursing through me. He couldn't resist. He created this complex, untraceable entity, and then signed his work, like an artist. The air in the room changed. I had found the thread, the one inconsistency in a perfect web. Lorenzo's gaze on me was blazing with a new, fierce respect. You found him. In 5 minutes, you found him. He took the tablet back, a predator's smile gracing his lips. Franco, I want everything on Leonardo. His habits, his mistresses, his favorite brand of toothpaste. He is now the key. Franco nodded, a new energy in his movements. I'll have a dossier in 2 hours. He left, the door locking behind him. We were alone again. Lorenzo turned to me. He didn't speak. He just closed the distance between us and pulled me into his arms. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but one of raw, unvarnished triumph. His mouth claimed mine, and I kissed him back with all the pent-up fear, frustration, and fierce pride I felt. I had done it. I had proven my worth not as a decoration, but as a weapon in his arsenal. When we broke apart, we were both breathing heavily. He rested his forehead against mine. You are extraordinary, he breathed, the words a confession. In that moment, the last barrier around my heart crumbled. The fear, the resentment, the sense of violation. It all melted away under the heat of his admiration and the thrill of being a partner, not a prisoner. I was falling for my captor. It was madness, but it was my madness. The plan was set in motion with brutal efficiency. Leonardo was a creature of habit. He visited the same exclusive, members-only bar every Thursday night. It was a place Lorenzo owned, though Leonardo didn't know that. The staff were Lorenzo's people. The very walls had ears. The following Thursday, I sat beside Lorenzo in the back of a darkened van parked a block away from the bar. We wore headsets and listened to the live feed from the bugs planted at Leonardo's usual booth. I was no longer just the analyst. I was part of the field operation. We heard the clink of glasses and Leonardo's loud, boastful laughter. He was with 2 of his men, celebrating what he thought was a successful, undiscovered strike against the great Lorenzo Rossi. And then, we heard it. The name we were waiting for. Hawk says the next payment is ready. The politician is on board. Once Rossi is out of the picture, the city is ours. My uncle will handle the dirty work, and I'll run the legitimate front. It's a new era. Lorenzo's hand found mine in the van's dark. His fingers laced through mine, tight and sure. The politician, I whispered. He means Alderman Rostenkowski, the one from the theater. Lorenzo nodded, his eyes fixed on the monitor showing the bar's entrance. The alliance is confirmed. He squeezed my hand. It's time. He gave a soft command into his headset. Inside the bar, the music cut out. The lights flickered and died, plunging the place into darkness and confusion for exactly 15 seconds. When the power came back on, Leonardo's 2 bodyguards were slumped in their seats, sedated darts in their necks, and Leonardo himself was gone, vanished from the booth as if he'd never been there. The van door slid open. Franco stood there. The package is secure. He's on his way to the warehouse. Lorenzo looked at me, the city lights reflecting in his determined eyes. The game is over, Sophia. Now we end it. The warehouse was a place of echoes and ghosts. It smelled of cold concrete, old oil, and fear. They had Leonardo in a metal chair in the center of the vast space, a single bare bulb hanging above him, casting a harsh, unforgiving light. His arrogance was gone, replaced by the pale, sweaty terror of a boy who had just realized he was playing with monsters. Lorenzo stood before him, a silhouette of immense power. I stood slightly behind him, near the shadows, my role as observer feeling more intense and real than ever. I was no longer in a sterile van. I was in the belly of the beast. Leonardo, Lorenzo's voice was calm, almost conversational. You have been a busy young man. You're a dead man, Rossi. Leonardo spat, but his voice cracked. My uncle will burn your world to the ground for this. Lorenzo took a slow step forward. Your uncle sent boys to do a man's job, and now he has lost his heir. He circled the chair, his footsteps echoing. You will tell me everything about your arrangement with Silas Hawk and Alderman Rostenkowski. The meeting places, the timelines. The proof, I'll tell you nothing. Lorenzo stopped behind him. He didn't touch him. He didn't raise his voice. He leaned down, his mouth close to Leonardo's ear, and whispered something. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw their effect. Leonardo flinched as if he'd been struck, his whole body going rigid. A dark stain spread across the front of his expensive trousers. The smell of urine mingled with the warehouse's scents. He broke. The words tumbled out in a sobbing, incoherent river. A safe house where Hawk was staying. A scheduled meeting with Rostenkowski at a private fundraisers club in 48 hours to finalize the transfer of power. Bank account numbers, passcodes, and the names of 2 captains in Lorenzo's own organization that Marino had turned. It was a treasure trove of betrayal. Lorenzo listened, his face impassive. When Leonardo finally fell silent, spent and weeping, Lorenzo straightened up. You see, Leonardo, Lorenzo said, his voice still terrifyingly gentle. That was not so hard. He nodded to Franco. Take him to the secondary location. Keep him comfortable. As Franco and another man escorted the broken boy away, Lorenzo turned to me. The harsh light carved his features into something both beautiful and brutal. You heard? I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I had just witnessed the absolute power he wielded, the effortless way he could dismantle a person's will. It should have horrified me, and part of me was horrified. But a larger, more primal part was awestruck. This was the man who had chosen me. This was the force that was keeping me safe. The fundraiser, I managed to say. That's our opportunity. It is, he agreed. They will be there, feeling secure, believing their plan is moving forward. They will be complacent. A cold smile touched his lips. It is the perfect time to introduce them to reality. We drove back to the penthouse as the sun was rising, painting the sky in fiery colors. The city was waking up to a day that would end with a seismic shift in its underworld, and none of the people in their cars and coffee shops had any idea. I sat in the passenger seat, watching Lorenzo's profile as he drove. The focused intensity, the absolute certainty. I had never felt so alive, so electrified, and so terrified in my entire life. Back in the penthouse, the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I was no longer a guest or a prisoner. I was a conspirator. We spent the day planning. Lorenzo spread maps and blueprints of the fundraisers club across the dining table. I helped by using my knowledge of event planning to identify staff routes, service entrances, and potential blind spots in the security he had already planned. You will be with me, he said, pointing to the main floor plan. As my date, it is the only way to ensure you remain in my sight and under my protection, and your presence will sell the illusion that I am unsuspecting, concerned only with a night out. The idea of walking into that lion's den by his side sent a fresh thrill of fear through me, but it was mixed with a fierce determination. I would be there. I would see it end. The night of the fundraiser arrived. A sleek black car collected us. I wore a dress that had appeared in the closet. A column of midnight blue silk that made me feel both powerful and vulnerable. Lorenzo was in a tuxedo that seemed painted on, the epitome of lethal elegance. He fastened a diamond necklace around my throat, his fingers brushing my skin. The clasp clicked shut with finality. Ready? He asked, his eyes meeting mine in the car's dim interior. Yes, I said, and I meant it. The club was a whirl of light, music, and money. Influential people glided across polished floors, their laughter a bright, brittle sound. I held onto Lorenzo's arm, my grip tight. He moved through the crowd with a relaxed confidence that was a masterpiece of deception. He introduced me as Sophia, a consultant. No one questioned it, and then I saw them. Across the room, near a massive ice sculpture, stood Alderman Rostenkowski, shaking hands and smiling his politician's smile. And beside him, whispering with a man I recognized from his photos, was Silas Hawke. He was thinner than I expected, with a bird-like sharpness to his features. He looked exactly like a man who brokered chaos. Lorenzo's hand covered mine where it rested on his arm. A subtle pressure. I see them too. The plan was in motion. Lorenzo's men, disguised as waitstaff and guests, were positioning themselves. The net was closing. We circulated, Lorenzo playing his part perfectly, exchanging pleasantries, all while we drifted inexorably closer to our targets. We were maybe 20 feet away when Hawke's eyes, sharp and constantly moving, found Lorenzo. Then they flicked to me, a flicker of surprise, then dawning comprehension. He knew. He knew I was the variable, the one thing he hadn't accounted for. He leaned and whispered something urgently to Rostenkowski. The politician's smile faltered. It was now or never. Lorenzo gave an almost imperceptible nod. All at once, the scene changed. The music cut off, the leading lights died, and emergency spotlights snapped on, creating pools of stark white light. In the sudden, shocked silence, Lorenzo's voice rang out, clear and absolute. "Alderman Rostenkowski, Silas Hawke, the party is over." Lorenzo's men blocked every exit. The other guests stood frozen, a tableau of confusion and fear. Hawke's face was a mask of cold fury. Rostenkowski looked like he was going to be sick. Lorenzo released my arm and took a step forward, the focus of every single person in the room. "Your plot is finished. Your puppet is in a cage. And you," he looked directly at Hawke, "you are a ghost who has been seen." It was a checkmate. Executed in a room full of the city's elite, there would be no quiet disappearance, no anonymous war. This was a public execution of their ambitions. As his men moved in to take Hawke and Rostenkowski into custody, Lorenzo turned back to me. The spotlights haloed him, this king of a dark world who had just defended his throne in the brightest light possible. He extended his hand to me, and without a moment's hesitation, I took it. The ride back to the penthouse was a silent, speeding cocoon. The city lights blurred past, streaks of gold and white against the deep velvet of the night. Lorenzo's hand held mine, his grip firm, grounding. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The energy radiating from him was a live wire, triumph, fury, and a fierce, possessive satisfaction. I leaned my head back against the seat, my heart still hammering. Not from fear, but from the aftershocks of what we had just done. We had won. Back inside the penthouse, the door clicked shut, sealing us in our private world. The silence here was different. It was charged, heavy with everything that had been unleashed. He shrugged off his tuxedo jacket and tossed it over a chair, his movements fluid and powerful. He loosened his bow tie, the ends hanging loose around his neck. He was shedding the skin of the public man, revealing the raw, untamed force beneath. He turned to me, his eyes burning in the dim light. They traveled over me, from my heels to the diamonds at my throat, a slow, scorching appraisal that made my breath catch. "You," he said, his voice a low, rough vibration that seemed to come from the center of the earth. "You were magnificent." He crossed the room in 3 long strides. He didn't kiss me. He framed my face with his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheekbones, his gaze delving deep into mine, as if searching for his own reflection. "When he looked at you," Lorenzo whispered. "When Hawke realized who you were, I saw it in his eyes. He knew you were the key, the one thing he could not control, could not predict, the flaw in his perfect plan. A possessive feral light ignited in his gray eyes. My flaw. His mouth crashed down on mine. This was not like the kiss in the library, a claiming of territory. This was a conflagration. It was the release of weeks of tension, of danger, of a battle fought and won. It was raw, desperate, and utterly consuming. His hand slid from my face, down my back, pressing me against him until not a sliver of light could pass between us. I met his fury with my own, my fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The diamond necklace dug into my skin, a sharp, precious pain. He walked me backward, his mouth never leaving mine, until my legs hit the edge of the large sofa. We fell onto it in a tangle of silk and desperate hands. The carefully constructed world of rules and control shattered into 1,000 pieces. There was only this: the heat of his skin under my palms, the taste of him, the scent of his cologne, and the night air clinging to him. He was meticulous, even in his abandon. His hands, which could command armies and break men, were surprisingly gentle as they explored my body, learning its landscape with a reverence that belied the violence of his world. When he finally entered me, it was with a slow, deliberate intensity that stole the air from my lungs. Our eyes locked. There were no more masks, no more games. I saw the man, the orphaned boy, the ruthless king, the lonely soul. And he saw all of me, the captive, the ally, the woman who had chosen to stand with him in the fire. It was a surrender and a victory all at once. A joining that felt less like a choice, and more like a destiny that had been waiting for us since the moment that Trey had tipped at the gala. The world outside, with its politics and its violence, ceased to exist. There was only the rhythm of our bodies, the meeting of our mouths, the shared, breathless climb toward a precipice we leapt from together. Afterward, we lay tangled in the silence, the only sound our ragged breathing slowly returning to normal. His heart beat a steady, strong rhythm against my ear. His arm was wrapped around me, holding me to him as if I were the most precious thing he had ever held. And in that moment, I knew I was. He pressed a kiss to my hair. "You are mine, Sophia," he murmured, the words a vow in the dark. "And I am yours." It was no longer a threat. It was a truth. The last fragment of the woman I had been, the woman who valued her independence above all else, finally let go. She drifted away on the tide of this impossible, terrifying, all-consuming love. I had not just accepted my cage. I had fallen in love with my jailer, and in doing so, I had found a freedom more profound than any I had ever known. I tilted my head up and kissed him, soft and slow, a seal on the bargain we had made with our bodies and our souls. "I know," I whispered against his lips, and for the first time, I was truly, completely at peace. The world was soft and hazy when I woke. Early morning light filtered through the windows, painting the room in shades of gold and gray. For a single, disorienting moment, I was back in my old apartment, the familiar weight of my own comforter on me. Then I felt him, Lorenzo. His arm was a heavy, warm weight across my waist, his breathing deep and even against my back. The events of the night came rushing back, the fundraiser, the confrontation, the shattering intimacy that had followed. A slow, deep warmth spread through my chest, a feeling so profound it was almost painful. I carefully shifted to face him. In sleep, the harsh lines of control were smoothed away. He looked younger, the weight of his kingdom momentarily lifted. His dark lashes fanned against his skin, and his lips, usually set in a firm, uncompromising line, were relaxed. My heart ached with a tenderness so fierce it stole my breath. This was the man beneath the wolf, the man I had fallen in love with. As if sensing my gaze, his eyes fluttered open. The winter-gray irises were cloudy with sleep. Then they focused on me, and they softened. A real, unguarded smile touched his mouth. "Good morning," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. He reached out and traced the line of my jaw with his fingertips. "Good morning," I whispered back, my throat tight with emotion. He leaned in and kissed me, a slow, languid kiss that tasted of sleep and belonging. It was a world away from the desperate passion of the night before. This was quiet. This was a beginning. The next few days were a strange, beautiful dream. The penthouse was no longer a prison. It was our sanctuary. The locks on the doors remained, but they were to keep the world out, not me in. We spent our time wrapped up in each other. We talked for hours. He told me about his mother, the poet, and how she would read to him in Italian, her voice a soft melody against the backdrop of his father's brutal business. I told him about my own parents, who had died young, and the lonely, determined life I had built for myself. We were two broken pieces, and somehow against all odds, we fit. He started taking me out properly. Not as an operative or a pawn, but as his partner. Dinner at quiet, hidden restaurants where the owners knew him by name and treated him with a respect that bordered on reverence. A private viewing at the art museum after hours, our footsteps echoing in the vast, empty halls as he explained the hidden symbolism in Renaissance paintings. He was sharing his world with me, the beautiful parts he had carved out for himself amid the darkness. One afternoon, he led me to a part of the penthouse I'd never seen, a sun-drenched solarium filled with orchids and the gentle sound of a trickling fountain. In the center was a grand piano. "You play?" I asked, surprised. "A little," he said modestly. He sat on the bench and gestured for me to join him. His long, capable fingers settled on the keys and he began to play. It was a Chopin piece, melancholic and beautiful, filled with a longing that resonated deep in my soul. I watched his face, the concentration, the flicker of emotion, as the music swelled. This was another secret, another layer of the complex man I loved. When the last note faded into the air, he looked at me. "My mother taught me," It was the one thing my father couldn't touch. The one thing that was just ours. Tears pricked my eyes. I lay my head on his shoulder. It's beautiful. He played another piece, something lighter, and I sat there with my head on his shoulder, surrounded by flowers and music, and I knew I had never been happier. This was the life he was offering me, a life of immense privilege and profound love, existing in the eye of a hurricane. But a hurricane, no matter how calm its center, is still a storm. The reality of his world knocked on our door one evening in the form of Franco. His expression was grim. Lorenzo was in the study with him for over an hour. When he emerged, the relaxed man from the solarium was gone. The dawn was back. "Marino is making his move," he said, his voice all business. "He knows about Hawk and Rostenkowski. He's desperate, and a desperate man is an unpredictable one." He came to me and took my hands. "He's declared war. There will be retaliation." The bubble of our happiness had been pierced. The fear returned, cold and sharp. "What does that mean?" "It means the rules have changed." His grip on my hands tightened. "It means I can no longer just defend. I have to eliminate the threat, permanently." I heard the unspoken words. It meant killing Alessandro Marino. This was the part of his world I had been able to ignore for a few blissful days. The violence that was its foundation. I searched his eyes, looking for the man who played Chopin, the man who held me while I slept. He was still there, but he was buried under the weight of the crown he wore. "You'll do what you have to do," I said softly, and I meant it. I was in this now, all of it. He pulled me into a fierce hug. "This ends soon, Sophia. I promise you, and then we can truly begin." I believed him, but as I held him, I felt a cold dread coiling in my stomach. The war was coming to our doorstep, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the final battle would demand a price. I just prayed it wasn't a price I wasn't willing to pay. The peace was shattered. The penthouse, which had begun to feel like a home, reverted to a command center. Men came and went at all hours, their low voices a constant grim murmur. Maps and blueprints once again littered the dining table, but these were not for infiltration or capture. They were for assault. Lorenzo was a general preparing for a final, decisive battle. The man who had played Chopin for me was now entirely consumed by the wolf. I stayed out of the way, a silent witness. I brought him coffee, which he would drink without seeming to taste it. I watched the lines of tension deepen around his eyes. The love I felt for him was now a painful, twisting thing, laced with a constant, low-grade terror. I was no longer afraid of him. I was terrified for him. 2 nights after Franco's visit, the storm broke. It started with a phone call. Lorenzo listened, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. He ended the call and looked at me. "They hit the dockyards. 3 of my men are dead. They took a shipment." His voice was dangerously quiet. "They're mocking me, showing me they can still reach out and touch what is mine." He picked up his phone and issued a single stark command. "Initiate nightfall." The room seemed to grow colder. Nightfall. The name itself sounded like an ending. He walked to a concealed panel in the wall and pressed his palm against a scanner. A section of the bookshelf swung open, revealing a small armory. He selected a handgun, checking the magazine with a practiced, chilling efficiency. He slid it into a shoulder holster and put his jacket back on. "You're going?" The question was a whisper, born of pure dread. "I have to," he said, his eyes meeting mine. There was no apology in them, only a grim necessity. "This ends tonight, one way or another." He crossed the room and pulled me into his arms. His kiss was hard and desperate, a brand of possession and a whispered goodbye. "Kel and 4 other men are outside this door. This penthouse is the safest place in the city. No matter what you hear, please do not open that door for anyone but me. Do you understand?" I could only nod, my throat sealed shut by fear. He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. "I love you, Sophia." It was the first time he had said the words. They should have been a comfort. Instead, they felt like a final testament. Then he was gone. The lock engaged behind him, and I was alone. The silence was absolute and terrifying. I stood in the center of the living room, wrapped in the arms of a fear so profound it felt like a physical presence. I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I believed in. I bargained. I promised anything, everything, if he would just come back to me. The hours dragged by. I didn't move from the sofa. I just stared at the door, listening to the deafening silence. Every minute felt like an hour. Every creak of the building settling made my heart stop. I thought of him out there in the dark, in the violence that was his birthright. I thought of the piano in the solarium, the Chopin etude, the man who existed beneath the armor. A sudden, loud bang from the hallway jolted me upright. It was followed by shouts, then the unmistakable concussive pop of gunfire. It was right outside my door. A fight, a breach, my blood ran cold. Cale was out there. 4 other men, and they were under attack. I heard a guttural cry, the sound of a body hitting the floor. More gunfire, closer this time. Then a terrible silence. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a sob. They were gone. Lorenzo's last line of defense was gone. A heavy, deliberate knocking shook the door. "Sophia," a voice called. It wasn't Lorenzo's. It was a voice I didn't recognize, rough and cruel. "Open the door, sweetheart. We know you're in there. Don't make us come in and get you." I scrambled back from the door, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. They were here for me, Marino's men. They had fought their way to the penthouse. Lorenzo had been drawn out, and I had been left vulnerable. The knocking turned into pounding. They were trying to break it down. The reinforced door held, but for how long? I was trapped. The safest place in the city had become a tomb. I looked around wildly for a weapon, for anything. There was nothing. I was utterly defenseless. The pounding grew more frantic. I could hear them working on the lock, the screech of metal on metal. This was it. They were going to get in. They would take me. They would use me to break him. Everything we had, everything we were, was going to end in this room. I backed into a corner, pulling a heavy vase from a side table, holding it like a club. It was a pathetic defense, but it was all I had. Tears streamed down my face, not for myself but for him, for the life we wouldn't have. The screeching at the lock stopped. A final thunderous blow shook the door in its frame. With a sickening crack, the lock gave way. The door swung open. The door swung open, revealing not the brutal faces of Marino's men, but a scene from a nightmare. Cale stood braced in the doorway, his shirt torn and dark with blood, his face a mask of grim fury. He held a smoking pistol in one hand. At his feet lay 2 motionless forms. The air reeked of gunpowder and copper. "They sent a cleanup crew," Cale grunted, his chest heaving, "to silence you." The boss was right. It was a diversion. He kicked the door shut, but the lock was destroyed. He dragged a heavy bookcase in front of it, barricading us in. "They'll send more." I stood frozen, the vase still clutched in my trembling hands. The immediate threat was gone, but the danger was far from over. Lorenzo was out there, walking into a trap meant for him, while they were systematically eliminating every piece of him back here, including me. "I have to warn him," I breathed, dropping the vase with a thud. It didn't break. Nothing in this gilded cage ever did. Cale shook his head, pulling out his phone. "Comms are jammed. They've isolated the building. We're on our own until the boss finishes his business or—" He didn't finish the sentence. "Or until he's the one who's finished." The reality was a cold fist around my heart. I was not just a liability. I was the key to the entire trap. Marino hadn't just wanted to draw Lorenzo out. He wanted to take me, to break him at the moment of his supposed victory. And we had played right into it. Another sound echoed from the hallway. The whine of an elevator ascending. They were coming back, more of them. Cale repositioned himself behind the barricade, his weapon raised. He was wounded. He couldn't hold them off forever. My eyes darted around the room, past the beautiful, useless furniture, and landed on Lorenzo's study. The study with the secure landline, the one he used when cellular networks were compromised, the one he said was a direct, hardwired line. "Cale! The study! The landline!" He glanced back, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Go, I'll hold them." I didn't hesitate. I ran into the study and snatched the heavy, old-fashioned receiver from its cradle. A dial tone. A beautiful, steady dial tone. My fingers, slick with sweat, dialed the number I had seen him call only once, the number for Franco's direct line. It rang once, twice, a third ring, then a click. "Boss? Franco? It's Sophia!" My words tumbled out in a frantic rush. "It's a trap!" The hit on the dockyard's nightfall was all a diversion. "They're here at the penthouse. They're trying to take me. It's the real target. You have to warn Lorenzo. A fraction of a second of stunned silence. Then Franco's voice, sharp as a blade. Understood. Hold on. I heard shouting and renewed gunfire from the living room. A cry of pain from Kale. They were breaking through. I clutched the phone, my lifeline to Lorenzo, praying Franco could reach him in time. The line was still open. I could hear the muffled sounds of Franco relaying my message, the screech of tires, then Lorenzo's voice, raw and terrifyingly close through the receiver. Sophia? The single word was a blast of pure, undiluted fear. I'm here, I choked out, tears of relief and terror streaming down my face. I'm here, but they're at the door. Listen to me. I am 2 minutes away. Do you hear me? 2 minutes. Stay on the line with me. I could hear the roar of his car engine, the sound of streets whipping past. He was coming. He was coming for me. I love you, I whispered into the phone, the words a shield against the chaos outside the study door. The response was immediate, a vow torn from his soul. I am coming for my wife. Wife. The word echoed in the tiny, safe space of the phone line. Then the world exploded. The study door splintered inward. A man I didn't recognize, his face contorted with violence, lunged for me. I dropped the phone and screamed. From the living room, a final, deafening gunshot rang out, followed by an abrupt silence. Kyle was down. The man grabbed my arm, his fingers digging cruelly into my flesh, and began dragging me from the study. I fought, kicking and scratching, but I was no match for his strength. He was pulling me toward the shattered front door, toward the elevator, toward a fate I knew would be worse than death. We were almost there when the elevator doors chimed. They slid open, and Lorenzo stood there. He was drenched in the night, his clothes dark with things I didn't want to name, his eyes burning with a feral, apocalyptic rage. In his hand was a gun, its barrel still smoking. He had cut a path through hell to get to me. The man holding me froze, his grip loosening in sheer, primal terror. Lorenzo didn't speak. He didn't need to. He raised his gun and fired once, a clean, precise shot. The man's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the floor, his hand falling away from my arm. The hallway was silent. Lorenzo's eyes found mine. The rage in them banked, replaced by a desperate, soul-deep relief. He strode forward, kicking the body out of his way, and pulled me into his arms. He held me so tightly I could feel the frantic, galloping beat of his heart against mine. He was trembling. I told you, he whispered into my hair, his voice ragged. I told you I would always find you. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in the scent of him, cedar, night, and blood. I wasn't afraid. In his arms, I was home. Later, after the cleanup crews had come and gone, after Kale had been rushed to a private hospital, we stood on the terrace. The city was quiet below, the war finally over. Marino was dead. His organization was in ruins. The threat was gone. Lorenzo stood behind me, his arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my head. It's done, he said, his voice quiet in the pre-dawn hush. I leaned back against him. What you said on the phone, you called me your wife. He turned me in his arms to face him. His gray eyes were serious, filled with a love so profound it stole my breath. You are in every way that matters. But if you need the paper, the ring, the ceremony, it is yours. Say the word, and the world will know you are mine, as I am yours. I looked at this man, this king of a dark and violent world, who played Chopin, and who had burned down his own kingdom to save me. I saw my future in his eyes, a life of passion, of danger, of a love so fierce it was a force of nature. I reached up and cupped his face. Yes, his smile was the dawn breaking after a long, long night. He kissed me, and as the first rays of sun painted the sky, I knew a monster had not found me. My destiny had seen me, and I would never be lost again.